In previous chapters, I've mentioned things like relationships and related fields. And when I'm talking about relationships, I'm actually talking about how different tables are related to each other. And those relationships are really defined by the data that's in those tables. An important note is whenever you sit down at a computer and open up FileMaker Pro to start a new database, what you're actually doing there is you're sitting down to construct something. Much like a home construction project, your database projects will proceed more smoothly if you first begin with some type of a plan. So the first thing that you want to do, even before you even open FileMaker, is to come up with a plan on what type of data you're going to be managing in your system. Just like any other project, if it's a very complex system, then it has a lot of parameters to it, you'll have a very complex plan. But if it's a really simple project, you'll still want to take a couple of minutes ahead of time to determine what type of data am I going to be storing in my system. So first take a few minutes, look at your data, and sketch out what types of information you plan to manage in your database. A pretty standard example of a database system where we have a customer database table, and we've got orders, and then we've got products. It's basically your standard fare, customers ordering products and creating order forms as a result. So an example like that, we can see what types of data we're going to be storing, and it's important for us that we pick discrete and unique buckets of information because that's going to ultimately tell us what tables we need to define in our system. So for example, when we're talking about customers and orders and products, we can sketch out onto just a simple piece of paper. We can say, okay, well, I've got orders. That's going to be a discrete and unique bucket of data. I've got customers. I've got products, possibly employees. And then when I determine what types of data I'm going to be storing, now I have my list of what tables need to be defined in the system. And then we can go back into the architecture stage that we talked about in the early chapters. And we can say, all right, well, I need to define an order table, I need to define a customer table, I need to define a product table, and so on. The other thing that's important after you've determined what your actual tables are going to be is to determine how they're related to each other. And what that means, and you'll see here the sketch that I have that's all cleaned up, we've determined that we need a customer table, we need an order table, and we need a product table, and then we've got this other table in there that's a line items table, which represents any product showing up on any order. So what we first need to do is ask ourselves, how is a customer related to an order? And the questions you ask yourself are, can one customer have many orders? And if that answer is yes, then you want to create a relationship between those two. If there's no relationship between the tables at all, you don't have to note that accordingly. But here in this particular example, we've determined that one customer can have one or many orders. So it has what's called a one-to-many relationship with orders. But what's important to note is that it does have a relationship with orders. And does order have a relationship with product? Yes. And does product have a relationship with order? Yes. One order can have many products and one product can have many orders. And in that case, we know that we would create a line items table, much like any invoice line item file. So after a little bit of what's called data modeling, we've determined what tables we need to build into FileMaker Pro, and we've determined which tables have relationships with each other. So now we go into our architecture stage within FileMaker and we define those tables accordingly. And in order to actually create relationships and physically define the relationships within FileMaker Pro, we're going to use something called the relationships graph. Let's take a look at the relationships graph using this example of the customers, orders, and products.